Dr. Scott Secor. I am the director of Renew Counseling Center, which is a part of Southern Nazarene University, and I am a professor in the graduate programs in counseling. And I'm joining you here for these really brief 10-minute mental health minutes is what we're calling them, as a way to just kind of get us to continue to have dialogue about mental health and some of the precursors to suicidal behaviors and suicidal thoughts. And so today's topic is mental health as a spectrum disorder. And so what this is going to kind of start to build on is starting to recognize the different spectrums of mental health. I think a lot of times people think that there's good and bad. You're either doing well or you're doing poorly. And I would like to say that, I want to kind of put that notion to bed a little bit today. That good mental health is not the presence of good and the absence of bad. And I say that to say that I think a lot of being a human being is that our days are kind of up and down in some ways. There are days when we're really on top of things, and there's days where we're struggling, and that doesn't mean anything necessarily broken inside of us or anything wrong. Mental health is on a spectrum. So I always say this to my patients, that things that make us good sometimes can make us struggle. So the things that actually help me in a lot of ways. So being anxious, for example, helps me prepare these mental health minutes for you all. However, anxiety is not my friend on Friday nights when I'm trying to relax. But what I've learned to do is start to look at those a little bit differently, using a more curious and forgiving lens. And that's what I want to present to us today as mental health well-being, being somewhere on a spectrum, okay? So again, what makes you perform well in certain scenarios may work against you in other ones, okay? So what is good mental health? If we were to look at it as kind of what's optimal, I would argue there's a couple of points, one of them being openness. I look at it as a stance that kind of looks like this. Where I have my arms wide open and I'm ready to take on what's coming. And I think that requires psychological flexibility. And what that means is the ability to feel and to understand what I'm experiencing, but not be caught in those feelings. And starting to look around at myself and others and the world in more holistic ways and not be captured by moments as much. And I think that requires an openness to experience, whatever I'm going to experience. That some of the good feelings and some of the bad. And if I can look at them those ways, I create a lot of what I call, again, psychological flexibility. And I think that's the precursor to balance in our systems, to be able to feel both sides of it, okay? So the spectrum model essentially is coming from what's considered a psychodynamic perspective that understands personality organization from the standpoint that we all have a way in which we organize our personalities. And it goes on a spectrum from what they consider to be kind of normal to neurotic to a little bit more borderline, and then sometimes to really problematic psychotic type of behaviors, which are very rare. But the main point is that a lot of us have tendencies, days in which we again function really, really well, that we have a good sense of self, that we have good capacity for rich relationships, that we handle our aggressive modes in very modulated ways, even if sometimes we inhibit them from time to time. But overall, our outbursts are pretty limited in some ways. Some of us, though, have a little bit harder time with that. We don't see ourselves in very healthy ways. We have trouble connecting, particularly in intimate ways with others. And sometimes aggression gets the best of us. So our anger gets to places that we don't necessarily like. And that can be directed towards ourselves, and it can be directed towards others. And so part of my job in a lot of ways as a psychologist is to help people understand where they're located in this spectrum, okay? And that's not in a way to pathologize them or say that they're bad. It's just to help understand what are the factors that are going to cause you to really struggle and to really thrive in a lot of ways. Well, what influences our mental health factors? What influences our personality organizations? Well, it's going to be a variety of things. Biological first. Some of it is genetic. And it can be passed down from generation to generation. If our grandparents were reactive emotionally, it's a good chance that we might be as well, because it's just a part of our genes. But our environments also impact us. Those of us that have been in the military and that have experienced combat and things of that nature, those environmental factors are going to impact how you react to certain things. And those go into kind of your personal experiences. So it's hard to fully pinpoint why people do what they do. It's a variety of factors. There's a lot of things that get into kind of why we behave in the ways that we do. So where does distress come from? I believe a lot of our distress comes from our interpretations of our distress, okay? So again, we often get stuck in our feelings, and we believe that our feelings are the gospel truth in some ways. And the truth is they're just experiences, and they're often very unmodulated and unprocessed. And I think when we give them the appropriate amount of weight, but we don't give them too much weight, we actually are accessing them in healthy ways. But a lot of people that I see struggle with mental health distress get caught in their feelings, and they're not able to fully rationalize through and see things more holistically, particularly related to themselves. I see a lot of recrimination that happens in therapy. People that beat themselves up a lot, that why can't I get past this? Why can't I get over this? And I would say that part of that is because you're giving too much interpretation to your distress. To suffer in some ways is to be human. I think we all know this. If you live life long enough, you're going to have a lot of loss. And that doesn't necessarily mean anything bad about you. It's called being human. And it's those experiences that often make the good experiences valuable in a lot of ways, to be able to experience both ends of the spectrum and feel them all as they come along, okay? And so how do we help people? How do we help people start to recognize where they're at on the spectrum, but also to give themselves a little bit of grace? I think we have to understand kind of, again, the factors that cause us to struggle. What are those things that get us into a place where things become difficult? And for all of us, it's going to be different things. It's going to be things like attachment and relationships and intimacy. Some of us, it's going to be our trauma histories. Those things can get triggered at very primitive levels, and we often have trouble regulating and understanding why we're even reacting the ways that we can. So interventions in therapy depend on where you're organized in some ways. Some of us need therapy that is deeply insightful to get us into those unconscious areas and to start to develop insight. Some of us just need some education to start to get some basics to understand kind of why the brain works the way that it does. And that's what we hope some of these mental health minutes can do, is just give us a little bit of information to get us curious. But at the end of the day, treatment is all about safety too. I have to be in an environment with someone who I do believe can help me, that is going to keep this confidential and is really listening to me. I always tell my students that if we had better listeners in this world, if we actually listened to one another better, I'd be out of a job in a lot of ways. Now, the good news for me in my career is that we don't do it very well, so I have a career. Unfortunately, though, that probably shouldn't be the case. If we actually took the time to really listen to one another and start to kind of help people connect the dots, I don't know that we would need therapy that much. So my take homes for this particular segment is this, that mental health distress is normal. It is going to happen from time to time, and that doesn't mean that you have anything necessarily diagnostic. And it can range from healthy to sometimes disordered. And much of those disordered perspectives, I would argue, come from primitive, reactive, emotional parts of the brain that are projecting onto a situation rather than really seeing it accurately. And we all do that from time to time. Some of us, though, get caught in it quite a bit, okay? And if we can learn to start to see as much as we feel and start to look at our feelings in more holistic ways, we can start to recognize that to be up and down generally is part of the human experience. It's when we cannot return to the baseline is when we start to really need to be able to seek help. But a lot of that comes from, again, being curious about what's going on and not pathologizing it, but knowing that maybe I'm in a place right now where getting some help could really benefit me. Hope this has been helpful for you. Thank you for being attentive.